Motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Karanga aho.
Good evening, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, it's a pleasure to stand and speak in this first reading debate on the bill sponsored by the member for Napier, Stuart Nash, who passionately speaks on this subject. But, sir, at the outset, might I just say to the House and remind the House that passion doesn't necessarily always represent what is right, correct or proper. And merely being passionate doesn't mean that your argument is an argument that is sustainable or one that should be followed or pursued. Now, the member has had his bill drawn from the ballot, and that's something that's worthy of congratulation because it's a rare thing. And in the previous debate, we had a long-serving member of this House who had not had his member's bill drawn from the ballot for 17 years. So I want to congratulate the member, Stuart Nash, on the luck, if you want to put it that way, Mr Speaker, of having this bill drawn from the ballot. Sir, the sponsoring member is a passionate member for his local constituency and his local community. Those of us that are constituent MPs are almost invariably always passionate, committed, supportive members of our local communities and our local government structure in our areas. And, sir, I heard with interest Stuart Nash talking about the hard work, the dedication, the diligence of local government elected representatives. And all of us know how hard-working, how diligent and how thorough local government representatives are across the nation. But, sir, this bill is not about a question of how hard our local government representatives work or not, because we know that they all do. This bill is about a definition of what is democracy. And so I venture to suggest at this stage of the debate that democracy can be a little bit like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. And we on this side of the House, sir, would say that the version of democracy that the sponsoring member is speaking of is actually not the same version of democracy that we would see on this side of the House. Now, this bill would require a vote on amalgamation of councils to be held in any affected area or district to be held in blocks in the sections of the wider area that's being considered. And the difficulty that I have with that, sir, is that that is exactly the problem that needed to be cured and fixed when we first came to government nearly 7 years ago, and we had to fix that because there was simply no mechanism for amalgamating councils in a way that allowed it to be progressed in a democratic process. And so what we were able to do in the one forced amalgamation that occurred was in the Auckland area, where that did go through as a forced amalgamation. But since then, all ministers of local government in this administration have been at pains to make clear again and again and again that there is no intention by this government to make any further forced amalgamations. So, for instance, in the area that the member represents in Hawke's Bay, there has been significant and considerable debate going on for years about the potential for amalgamation, about the potential for improvement, about the potential for improved efficiencies in that part of the country. And the member, to his credit, has followed the old adage that all politics is local to the nth degree, and indeed has carved out a niche, a career, a niche political spot for himself by advocating for the retention of the existing status quo within Hawke's Bay. Now, that might fulfil in the short term the goals of an aspirant local constituent MP or candidate, but it doesn't necessarily improve the local government quality of service or supply or efficiency to the good people of Hawke's Bay. And what I find most concerning about the bill as introduced by the member is that this bill would revert to the situation that was in place prior to the changes promises that we made back in 2012. And the problem with that, sir, is that a minority can actually veto the intent of a majority. And that's not democracy, sir. That's not democracy in anybody's books. And so to simply create a system where the individual blocks of voting are so small that each one requires a majority in its own right, and if you don't achieve that majority in each one of the little blocks, that enables a power of effective veto, that's not democracy. That is not how any kind of change will ever occur. And, sir, the Minister for Local Government addressed the Local Government New Zealand annual conference only a week or two ago. And she made the point in her speech to the Local Government New Zealand conference that inevitably the conversation about how local government plays its part in embracing growth and addressing challenges usually turns on what the structures look like. And she's absolutely right in that point. And she also made the point in her speech to Local Government New Zealand that local government in New Zealand has developed over the years in a pretty ad hoc sort of a way. And we now face ourselves, we're faced as a nation with a modern country with the demands of growth and the pressure of new and required infrastructure being developed, and a local government model that in some parts of the country is no longer suitable for purpose. So the real question for us is how do we ensure that the local stays in local in terms of local people, local entities coming to a conclusion and a decision about what is the best type of local government structure in their areas, and whether that mechanism should be one that is as it used to be, which was effectively one that enabled the minority to veto the majority, or should it be, as we have created in our 2012 reforms, a situation that enables adequate and very full and comprehensive community involvement, discussion and debate on any potential changes. Now, the member sponsoring the bill, Stuart Nash, in his introductory comments made mention of the situation regarding Wellington and the Local Government Commission's decisions or plans there that have in fact now been negated, and they've gone back to the drawing board. And the reason that they went back to the drawing board was because demonstrably the people in that greater Wellington area didn't like what was being suggested by the Commission. Now, I would venture to suggest, sir, that that is a very good example of the reforms that we made in 2012 working effectively and as they were supposed to, because the reforms that we put in place in 2012 rest fairly and squarely on local communities and local regions making the decisions for themselves. And if there demonstrably and clearly isn't a wish by locals to go forward with a plan, whether it's suggested by the Local Government Commission or not, then that plan should not proceed. And that's exactly what has occurred in the greater Wellington area. And I would venture to suggest, sir, that that is proof that it is working well and doesn't need changing. And so this bill is a bill that I think is an earnest bill. It's a bill that panders nicely to the political niche and branding and marketing that the member has carved out for himself on his local patch. But the question I ask the House tonight, sir, is this bill in the best interests of the people of Hawke's Bay, or indeed any other part of New Zealand that may want to eventually, at some point, want to consider how best their local government is structured and how best local government services are provided for local ratepayers and their area. This bill, sir, in my view, simply does not enhance local democracy. It really effectively just blocks it. Sir, the government will not be supporting this bill. We don't think it achieves anything. In fact, I think it reverts back to a situation that was not tenable and not one that we could support. We made changes in 2012 exactly to prevent the situation occurring that the member now seeks to reintroduce. Sir, this bill is an earnest bill, but it's not a bill that's going to achieve the purposes to which it seeks a result. And I don't think that members, if they give it careful consideration, will come to the view that they can support the proposition put forward by the sponsor, Stuart Nash. Sir, I regret that I can't support this bill, nor can the government, and we intend to vote against it at first reading.